I don't always relate on a deep personal level to the stories that Stephen King writes. That's not meant as a negative criticism, though. King stories transport me into the furthest reaches of imagination where reality is of no import, and I'm rarely concerned with whether or not it is relatable to my own life or history. I've never had an encounter with a vampire or a psychokinetic prom queen. None of my cars have ever tried to murder anyone. None of my pets have ever returned from the grave. I haven't ever been an integral part of thwarting the apocalypse following a deadly global pandemic. Yet. But the body is relatable to me in an allegorical way that few, if any, other King stories or stories of any other author have ever managed to be. Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. Happy New Year, everyone. It's 2022, and I'm sure that this year will be an experience. In this video, I am continuing the different season series and my ongoing chronological exploration of all the books, stories, and unending intellectual property adaptations of Stephen King's prolific bibliography. Different Seasons was a collection of 4 novellas which was published in 1982. So far in this series, I have covered the novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, the film adaptation of that story, The Shawshank Redemption, the novella Apt Pupil, and the film adaptation of the same name, and the third novella from Different Seasons, and the topic of discussion today is The Body. The Body, a brief-ish summary. It's the summer of 1960, and after a boy disappears and is presumed dead, 12-year-old Gordy LeChance and his 3 friends set out to find his body along the railway tracks. During the course of their journey, the 4 boys venture into the Maine woods and find life, death, and intimations of their own mortality. The Body is an epic journey on a small scale, which, having said that aloud, sounds a bit like an oxymoron. But it's all about the perspective from which the story is told that gives it the feel of both a heroic tale and a coming-of-age journey. It's like Lord of the Rings, but instead of orcs, the evil nemesis are a ragtag group of asshole teenagers. And instead of Mount Doom, the focal destination is a dead guy. Maybe Lord of the Rings was not the best analogy. The Body is like Lord of the Flies, except they're not stranded on an island, and instead of a wild pig, there's a dead guy. That's not it either. The Body is like the Bible, but rather than the disciples, there are these 4 kids who... History and background. A great deal of surmising and theorizing by many a blogger and YouTuber has gone on in an effort to determine just how much of The Body is autobiographical for King. And there are indeed a few parts of the story that sound as if they could potentially be quotes from King himself regarding his career as a writer. As is so often the case, I can't seem to find any direct quotes or interviews with King to either validate or disprove these various suppositions, but it seems to be a widely held belief among constant readers that experiences from King's life informed and shaped the characters and the story, with some saying the story is loosely based on King's life and others saying it is heavily influenced by King's life. There is a story floating about the internet that a former friend of Stephen King by the name of George MacLeod claimed that King had stolen the idea for the story from him. Most of what I'm able to find regarding MacLeod's plagiarism accusations comes from Reddit and Wikipedia, so not the most reliable of sources. But it appears that the story first came to light in the unauthorized biography entitled Haunted Heart: The Life and Times of Stephen King by Lisa Rogach. MacLeod supposedly sued King after he was refused a portion of royalties from both the novella and the movie adaptation, Stand By Me. However, I can't find any information regarding what happened with the lawsuit or what the determination of the court was. Considering King was able to deny MacLeod's request to be compensated for the story and the film, I'd have to assume that the court ruled in King's favor. I guess I'll have to pick up the unauthorized biography to see if there are any further details regarding MacLeod, his accusations, and the case brought against King. Something I have neglected to touch on thus far in the Different Seasons series is that each of the novellas from the Different Seasons collection are linked, though not in any substantial way. The connections are essentially brief allusions to or mentions of characters or places in the other stories from the collection. However, the body takes place in the recurring King setting of Castle Rock, and a number of the characters and events that exist in previous and future King stories, which are also set within the Castle Rock universe, find their way into the body as well. I will refrain from specifics as to not spoil the fun for anyone who has yet to discover these Easter eggs for themselves. Raised rural. So much of the story told in the body brought me back to my childhood and conjured a great many recollections that had been buried in the recesses of my memory. Some fond, some tragic, some straight up hilarious. There is a familiarity and a level of relatability that I feel with this story that I don't often experience in King's stories. Not that King has never written a character that I related to or a scenario I had never found myself in at one time or another. It's just the level to which I connect with the body that made it a unique reading experience. I grew up in a tiny blink and you'll miss it town in upstate New York. The term one traffic light town is actually too grandiose for where I was raised. There are no traffic lights. You couldn't honestly even call it a town, really. The only noteworthy landmarks are a bar and a church, which are directly across the street from one another, and they've both been boarded up for years. But while there are no gas stations, movie theaters, shopping malls, or much of anything in the way of urban staples, I had the luxury of being a free-range child surrounded by cornfields, gravel pits, woods, and hidden waterfalls. And it wasn't just the rural setting that reminded me of my youth, it was the characters, the people. Much like the main character in the story, Gordy, I had a small group of friends, each one an outcast, an oddball, or a weirdo. They came from a variety of dysfunctional families or had experienced abuse and misfortune to one extent or another. Hell, one of my friends not only fit the description of Vern, he had the same name. And then, of course, there was the gang of older asshole bullies that antagonized, threatened, and beat on us. Somehow, even in a tiny nowhere town, there was no shortage of antagonists. My friends and I were constantly doing dangerous, stupid shit together, climbing bridge trestles and jumping into the Susquehanna River 30 feet below, wandering around in the forest with few, if any, provisions, least of all a compass should we get hopelessly lost, which we did on occasion. Constructing elaborate, extremely unsafe tree houses, one of which I actually fell out of when a board gave way directly underneath me, which sent me careening down the trunk of the tree a good 10 to 12 feet. And then there are the more emotional, visceral elements of the story that anyone could relate to, the struggles and uncertainty of adolescence, the fear of the unknown and the trials of youth. The times we lost friends, comforted our companions when they had problems at home, came to each other's aid, and had each other's back no matter the situation. We got into trouble together. We succeeded and failed together, thick as thieves. Those were good times for me, and those formative years have stuck with me. I learned a lot of valuable lessons, some of which I may have had to learn a few times before they stuck. I wasn't always a fast learner. I had considered telling some of the more memorable, entertaining stories from my youth, but I don't know that those stories would really be of interest to anyone. I don't know, I might do a separate unscripted video that's just me telling some semi-autobiographical stories in the spirit of the body. I don't know, I think it would be fun for me at least. Final thoughts. The body struck a chord with me that brought with it such a massive wave of nostalgia, and I'm sure it does the same for many readers who grew up in a pre-internet, cell phone-free world in a rural area. Much like Shawshank, The Body was a radical departure from King's usual approach and is far removed from genres King was predominantly known for working within. With The Body, King further emerged from the pigeonhole the critics had attempted to place him in, and in turn proved once again that he wouldn't allow his creative output to be dictated by the precedent that his earlier publications had set. Next week, I'll be discussing the movie adaptation of The Body, the much-loved and celebrated Stand By Me. It's been at least 20 years since I've watched the movie, and I remember it being great, but it was a long time ago, and I hadn't read The Body before watching it, so I'm curious to see how it holds up and how it compares to the story. New videos drop on this channel every Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so be sure to sensually stroke the sexy subscriber bell so you get notifications. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty please with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.